All right, this is the peddler's story. The house appeared to me to be just an old place that nobody thought good enough to live in, though it seemed sturdy and sound. I wondered why nobody was living in it since there weren't enough houses in the area. My mother told me about the only family that had ever lived there. She couldn't remember their names, but they had come to this particular farm as one of the earliest families and settled near what is now the town of Harmon, West Virginia. Now the man and his boys were very rough in their language and in their actions, but they knew a great deal about farming and the construction of buildings. They had built this house. It was one of the first buildings in the neighborhood. The whole family seemed to have a mean disposition. They would lie, cheat, or steal if it meant any kind of personal gain. Their unfortunate neighbors would shake their heads and say, "They will not get away with all of this. They will get their punishment. Just you wait and see." One evening, a peddler stopped at their house and asked to spend the night. They agreed only after he had offered to pay them well. During the night, the father crept into the peddler's bedroom and killed him. He removed several $100s from his wallet, too. He then went back to bed, planning to bury the peddler in the morning. With the coming of daylight, some visiting neighbors arrived. The woman of the household kept the visitors outside while the man tried to find a place to dump the dead body. There were some loose boards in the kitchen floor. The man tore them up, and he and his sons buried the peddler there. When the visitors finally came into the kitchen, they found the men repairing the floor in order to keep the house in good condition. This should have been the end of the story, but the peddler's death would not go unavenged. Almost every night after the murder, the ghost of the victim roamed the house. It kept tearing at the boards, trying to get to its body, and visited the murderer several times each night. The man was so frightened that he could neither sleep nor eat. Yet, he did not take his family and move away. There seemed to be some strange power forcing him to stay in that house. One night, when he could stand the visits of the ghost no longer, he fled from the house screaming and has never been heard of since. His family ran to a neighbor's house and told their story in hopes that the ghost wouldn't visit them there. They returned to the house the next day, gathered all their possessions together, and nobody has ever heard of them since that time. I can't say whether the house is haunted or not, but nobody has lived in it since its first occupants. The old folks of this area stay far away from that place because they say they can still hear the ghost of the peddler at night, tearing at the boards of the kitchen floor and trying to get to its body. The next story is the Black Dog Ghost. Now, during the American Revolution near Connellsville, Pennsylvania, a spy and his dog were captured by the British and taken back to headquarters to stand trial. That very night, the spy was sentenced to death and was taken out in the yard to be shot. When he was outside, he tried to escape and was cut to shreds by a soldier with a sword. When the dog saw this, it leapt at the swordsman with a fierce growl, but the soldier turned in time to stab the large black hound with his sword. As the dog lay on the ground dying, it stared at the soldier with a fierce look of hate. The soldier laughed and gave the dog a hard kick in the side to finish it off. That night, while another soldier was coming back from guard duty, he noticed a large black hound lying near the campfire, just like the one his comrade had killed. When he walked over to the dog, it disappeared before his eyes. The soldier went to tell the man who killed the dog what had happened and to warn him that he should be careful, since he would be on duty that night. The soldier took it as a joke. He told his comrades the story and made fun of his friend who had warned him. That night, when the soldier went out on guard duty, a mysterious thing happened. The rest of the men were awakened by the fierce growls of a dog and the screams of their comrade out on guard duty. Terrified by these horrible screams of agony, they gathered around the campfire. Finally, the screams halted, and something was heard crashing through the bushes. After a few minutes, the soldier who had been on guard duty came into the light of the campfire with his clothes torn to shreds, but not a scratch on his body. When the men asked him what had happened, he could not speak a word, but just stared off into the darkness of the night. Finally, on the third night, the soldier died from fright. The very minute of his death, the cries of the dogs ceased and were heard no more. Now, the next one's the barn ghost. Many years ago, an old farmer was preparing to start to town to buy his supplies for the month. It was not unusual for farmers to go to town once a month to buy supplies for themselves and their families. This day, however, was to be unusual. The farmer, whom we shall call Jed Smith, although his first name is not definitely known, was to have a strange experience. Now, Jed left home at about 7 o'clock that morning in order to get into town before the stores opened. It was about 5 miles and would take every bit of the time to travel the old rugged road with his large wagon. Now, after he had hitched up the horses and had gotten the lunch his wife had fixed for him to eat in town, he started on his day's journey. This is the last clear account we have of old Jed Smith. When Jed didn't return by dark, his wife was naturally worried. She couldn't imagine what had happened to him. The closest neighbors lived 3 miles away, and Miss Smith decided not to try to walk to their house and ask if they had seen Jed because their house wasn't even close to the road. The next morning, when Jed still hadn't returned, Miss Smith set out to find him. She finally learned that he and his team had fallen off the road and down a high cliff and had all been killed. She found it hard to believe that it was an accident because her husband was a good driver and knew the road well. Maybe someone had forced him off the road on purpose, she thought. One day, Miss Smith went to the barn and was startled to see her husband's ghost. It must have been a ghost because it told her that his murderer would be punished in the same way he had died. Then the image was gone. A few months later, a stranger called at Miss Smith's home and tried to buy her property. He said he had heard of her husband's accident and knew it would be hard for her to keep up the farm. There was something in his voice which made him sound very anxious to obtain the place. But when Miss Smith refused, he left in a hurry. A few days later, Miss Smith heard some more news. A neighbor stopped at her house and told her that a stranger had been killed at the very spot where her husband had died. The neighbor went on to say that he was an oil dealer and would do anything to get land he thought might have oil on it. That night, Miss Smith put the whole story together. She now remembered her husband had told her that the last time he had gone to town, a man had wanted to buy their land. He had told her that when he refused to sell it, the man had said that he would get it one way or another. Her husband had remarked to her then that he would rather die than sell the land. Miss Smith wept quietly as she thought of her husband's strong will and also of his death. All right, this one's the miner's wife. One night, a miner became ill and left work early to go home. When he arrived, he walked straight to the bedroom to arouse his wife to fix something for his illness. As he entered the room, he found his wife there with another man. The enraged miner grabbed the man and gave him a thorough beating. After throwing him out of the house, he returned to his wife for an explanation. An argument followed, and the wife, laughing at him, said she wanted a divorce. Shame mounted upon shame, and the miner returned to work, forgetting his illness. When he got back, he told his friends what had happened and swore revenge. Still angry, he began working carelessly. An hour or so later, when a coal car was coming down the tracks, the miner fainted and fell in front of it. The other men did not notice until it was too late, and the car ran over him, crushing his head and his legs. At the funeral, the miners remembered that the dead man had said that if anything ever happened to him, he would return to get revenge upon his wife. The men told his widow, but she just laughed, saying that she was going to marry her lover and move far away from there. As it turned out, the man she was cheating with left town after the accident. She was now left by herself, heartbroken and very lonely. She was seen only when she went out to buy groceries. Then, one dark and dreary night, exactly 1 year after the accident, a terrible thing happened. It was a little after 12 o'clock when her neighbors heard a scream from the widow's house. They quickly gathered outside the house and called, but no answer was heard. The men decided to break down the door to find out what had happened. When they got to the bedroom, the door was locked, and they broke it down to see what was wrong. The widow's body was lying across the bed, the face scratched beyond recognition. What caused this? No one is really sure. Could it really have been her husband, who had come back for the revenge he swore that he would take? All right, this story is Yankee Thrift. My grandfather, who was an engineer and demanded reason and fact for everything that happened, often made the statement that those who believed in ghosts were fools. When he spoke of the old house on 8th Avenue in Huntington, West Virginia, however, his attitude changed. Soon after he returned from the Spanish-American War, he learned of a beautiful 2-story house that was for sale at a very low price. So low, in fact, that he thought the price had been misquoted. Since he was a thrifty Yankee, he was afraid of missing the opportunity of a lifetime. Therefore, he rushed to make the purchase. Now, upon closing the sale, he was told that the previous owner had been unable to keep a renter for the property. For some reason, no one would live in the house for more than one night at a time. Renters would usually leave before morning and send a teamster in to move their furniture the next day. Grandfather decided that after the family was settled in their new home, he would pay a visit to one of the former occupants. This is the story that was related to him. A very wealthy widow who had decided to vacation in Boston left for Negro maid Clara and the maid's husband, John, in charge of the house. Clara decided that while the owner was away, she would take in washing to make a little money. John, returning home from work one day, saw a white man leaving by the back door and suspected the worst of his wife. Later, when he confronted Clara with his accusation, she accused him of the same infidelity. One word led to another, and in the heat of the argument, John stabbed her in the throat. Running to escape his knife, she started up the stairs, but the loss of blood was too much. She slumped, falling backward like a heap of wet wash to the bottom of the stairs. Realizing what he had done, John grabbed her by the hair of the head and pulled her into the kitchen where he tried to finish his job. But she revived and with the strength of desperation pulled the china closet to the floor. This only infuriated John more, and with one quick swipe of the knife, he completely cut her head from her body. Later, he threw the head into the coal-burning cook stove and dismembered the rest of her body. Several years later, he was convicted and executed for his wife's murder. After recounting this story, the former renter declared vehemently that his family was unable to live in the house. Footsteps, groans, and shrieks filled the night with horror. My grandfather thought this was nonsense and said so in no uncertain terms. The first night he and his family lived in the house, they thought they heard steps in the hallway. Each night the sounds increased in volume, until at last no one could sleep unless the gas lights were left burning in the hall. Also, no one could sleep in the bedroom where Clara had once slept because the blankets would not stay on the bed. grandfather was a stubborn man and determined not to let these strange happenings ruin his investment. He was convinced that there was a logical explanation. Several months later, during a hot summer night, a gust of wind blew out all the gas lights. Before anyone could relight them, shuffling steps were heard on the stairs. A loud crash came from the kitchen, and sounds followed as if every dish in the house was being broken. Horrible screams came from one of the bedrooms. Several minutes later, grandfather's sister was found lying on the floor in Clara's bedroom. Her nightgown had been stripped from her body, and great welts, some as big as a thumb, covered her entire torso. She said that she had been beaten with a black snake whip. Even Yankee Thrift could not withstand this incident. Soon afterwards, the house was left vacant, and one night it mysteriously burned to the ground. All right, everybody, this one's the mysterious music. Several years ago, near the small town of Cottageville, an elderly engineer died. The old man had lived in a small house approximately 2 miles down the track from the town, and it was fairly well concealed by the heavy woods. It was said that the old engineer had been very fond of the Christmas season and was always singing carols and buying the smaller children candy. It was also said that he had one possession of which he was really proud: an old phonograph with some old-time records, mostly of Christmas carols. Now, in the summer of 1968, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company took up the tracks outside of Cottageville so they could be put to use elsewhere. After the tracks were removed, hunters found that the track bed provided good access to the thicker parts of the woods. During the track lifting process, the house where the old man had lived was completely destroyed. 2 days before Christmas, Bill Johnson was driving out the track bed when he heard what he described as music blowing through the trees. He turned off the motor so he could hear more clearly. When he tried to start the car again, the starter wouldn't even turn the engine over. Then, Bill saw a man walk across the track bed and go into an old house on the other side. And at the same time, the music began to grow softer. Then, all of a sudden, the music stopped. And at the same moment, the house and the man vanished. Bill said he was scared to death and knew he had to get out of there. To his relief, now his car started as easily as it ever did. It has been said by elderly neighbors that the old engineer always insisted that any visitor listen to his records. If a person didn't, the old man considered it an insult. The next night, 13 boys in 3 cars went to the same place Bill had gone. They turned off their motors and had been waiting there for about 15 minutes when a strange, disturbing type of music became audible. It sounded as if it were coming right through the trees, or perhaps out of them. It was just as Bill had described, except for the fact that neither the man nor the house appeared to them. But they did hear the music, and none of the cars would start until the music had stopped. This happened on the evening before Christmas Day, and it never happened on the nights that followed. Everything mysterious stopped when Christmas had passed. But there will be another Christmas, and the boys plan to investigate further. This is the last lodge of Ravenswood. During my last year in high school, I worked part-time in the local movie theater. I ran the projector and swept the place out at night. I had not worked there quite 3 months when I witnessed a most frightening sight. I was alone in the theater and had finished my work. I was about to walk down the aisle and check the fire exit to make sure it was locked, when something passed behind the screen, carrying what seemed to be a lantern. I stopped dead still and watched the figure walk across the stage and disappear on the other side. I was too frightened to follow, so I made my way cautiously to the ticket booth and telephoned the police. I then called my employer and reported an apparent burglar. She told me to wait outside until she got there. I had been outside only a few minutes when the police arrived. I again explained what I had seen, and they proceeded to search the entire theater. Their search brought no results, and they even hinted that maybe I had just thought I'd seen something. As they started to leave, I asked them if they had checked the rear door. They said the rear door was locked. The theater is housed in one of the oldest buildings in Ravenswood, and the doors can only be locked from the inside unless you have a key. I had the only key to the rear exit in my pocket. When my employer arrived, I told her that the police had searched the place and found nothing. I also told her that the rear door had been locked at the time I saw the burglar. She didn't seem a bit surprised and told me she believed my story of what I had seen. Her attitude toward the situation seemed strange to me, and I asked her if she was worried about the person who was now locked inside the theater. She told me she wasn't, because the same person had been there for 30 years. I had always considered my employer a level-headed woman, and her statement confused me completely. It was at this point that she began relating to me the story of Ravenswood's last lodge. She started out by telling me that I was not the first person who had sighted the figure in the theater. Many of her workers had seen him in the past. Many years ago, there was a lodge hall in Ravenswood on the second floor of the building adjoining the theater. The full history of the lodge was not known because the membership and its activities were shrouded in secrecy. The biggest mystery seemed to center around the initiation ceremonies. Prospective members were expected to stay all night in the attic of the lodge. It is not certain exactly what went on during the night, but it is known that many men refused to stay in their confinement for the full length of time. There was even an attempt to evict the group, but their lease was legal and binding. The order came to an abrupt end when the building was gutted by fire one night during an initiation. All the members escaped but one, the man in the attic, where the fire is believed to have originated, was not found. No legal proceedings could be brought against the group or its leaders because of lack of evidence. The building has since been restored, but the lodge has never again held a meeting. I asked my employer if she believed the figure I had seen to be the man lost in the fire. She told me she was sure of it. She explained that before the fire, the buildings had been connected instead of being separated as they now were by a brick wall. She also told me that there were still a few passages that connected the buildings. I asked her if she had ever seen the figure herself, and a look of pain came over her face. She said she had, many times. I asked her if she believed it to be a ghost. She said that she did. I thought for a moment that she was out of her mind. I had always thought of her as a smart businesswoman. Now she seemed to be acting like a superstitious old fool. I didn't believe a word she had told me. When I got home that night, I asked my father if a lodge had really existed in that building. I decided not to tell him about what I had seen that night. He seemed reluctant to discuss the subject, but after some persistence on my part, he began to speak. He confirmed the fact that a lodge had existed and that a fire had occurred. I was so amazed that I asked him about a man being lost in the fire. This he also confirmed. I then told him about my employer believing that the man lost in the fire was still roaming the building in spirit form. He asked me what had led me to this subject, and I told him about what I had seen. His face seemed to freeze, and he said nothing for a few minutes. I told him I didn't believe my employer's story because she had seemed so certain of the presence of the person. She seemed almost to have contact with him. It was at this time my father told me something that I hadn't known before. The man lost in the fire was my employer's husband. The theater has since been closed, but the building remains. This one here is the farmhouse ghost. My aunt went to visit some of her relatives in St. Clair, Ohio, arriving there from West Virginia in the evening at about 7 o'clock. After having a late supper and chat with the family, she decided to go to bed because she was very tired. This happened at the turn of the century, and traveling such a distance at that time was more tiring than it would be today. She had been asleep for about 5 hours when she was suddenly awakened by a strange noise. She opened her eyes and looked around. The image of a man grasping a bloody club in his right hand was walking toward her. The next instant, he disappeared. My aunt didn't scream for help, thinking that she was just dreaming because of her exhaustion. She closed her eyes and fell asleep once again. After supper the following evening, the family gathered by the fireplace for a quiet evening. My aunt's Uncle Harry began to tell ghost stories. He told everyone that the house they were now sitting in was believed to be haunted. Everyone became interested, so he told them the story he knew. 15 years before, a family named Walker lived in the huge old farmhouse. They were an eccentric family who never got along very well together. Mr. Walker had mental problems that no one knew about until one day he took a fit and clubbed his wife to death while she was sleeping. The murder occurred in the bedroom now being occupied by my aunt, and it was said that Mr. Walker's ghost often returned to the scene of the murder he committed. One other family had lived in the house before my aunt's relatives moved in, and their older daughter claimed to have seen his ghost return. My aunt couldn't believe what she had heard. She had deliberately failed to mention what she had seen to anyone. Now she explained to the family that she had seen a mysterious apparition the night before. They told her that she was probably dreaming, but to this day, she sincerely believes she saw Mr. Walker's ghost at the old farmhouse. All right, this is the wealthy widower. In the small community of Glen Falls, a huge white mansion surrounded by pines stands on a lonely hill. A legend accompanies this strange but stately dwelling, which is now empty and weather-beaten. The land around the house was once owned by a wealthy widower and his son. Being a very miserly and conservative fellow, the widower lived in a small log cabin where the present mansion is situated. He was obsessed by the lust of money, and he kept all his treasures in a locked box under his bed. Money became so important to him that he found it difficult to trust his own son. His son, an easygoing young man of 20, did not miss the joys of wealth. The widower's love of money finally drove him to his grave. His mind had grown weak from worry and the fear of being separated from his precious box. Before he died, he buried his money under the floor of his log cabin. The widower left a will giving all his land to his only son, but the clever man had made one stipulation. His son was not to tear down the little log cabin. The son could build anywhere else on the land, but the cabin was to remain where it was. A few years after the death of his father, the young man married a girl from a nearby town and took his bride to live in the cabin on the hill. His wife, a prominent figure in society, despised living in the dingy cabin and urged him to tear it down and replace it with a house that was suitable to their position. After much begging and pleading, the young man finally consented. While the cabin was being taken down, the money was discovered under the floorboard where the widower had left it. All the money was used to build the most extravagant house in the area. When the building was completed, the wife decided to give a party in order to show off their new home. The party was a success, and the guests were astonished by the beauty of the mansion. But after the guests left, the proud owners soon retired. They locked the doors to their mansion, fearing that someone might steal their rich possessions. In the morning, the mistress of the house found the front door standing open. Amazed by the scene, she ran to awaken her husband. He was terrified to think that someone had come in during the night. They searched the house and found nothing missing. Only a rug in the middle of the floor had been turned wrong side up. The next 2 nights, the same thing happened. Then the husband decided to stay awake to catch their prowler in the act. He sat in a chair near the door with his gun in hand until the hour of 12, without hearing or seeing anything. He finally tired of the game and started up the stairs to his room. Just then he heard footsteps outside. The door jarred and the locks fell free. As the door swung open, the figure of his father appeared in the doorway. In his panic, the young man shot the image and it disappeared. Terrified by the thought of killing his own father, he turned the gun to himself and fired. His wife, standing at the top of the stairs, had witnessed the scene. She was found beside the body of her husband in a state of delirium. The house still stands on the hill in Glen Falls, West Virginia. This is the ghost of Hangman's Hollow. In the 1920s, there was a vicious moonshiner in the area of Gilman, West Virginia, near Elkins, who had declared war on government agents or raveneurs. Every time one would come around any of his stills, he would barbarously murder him and then dismember the body and cremate the remains in a furnace used to make charcoal for the stills. This went on for several years, but finally the murderer was caught by a group of federal men who had combined their forces to avenge all the agents who had been murdered while doing their duty. Since it was almost dark when they made their capture, the agents decided to wait until morning to transport the prisoner to a federal jail. They placed the moonshiner in an outbuilding and left one man on guard while the rest went to bed. The next morning, the raveneurs found their fellow worker lying unconscious outside the shed, which was empty. Immediately, they started to comb the nearby woods for their prisoner. About noon, one of them gave a signal shot, and they all gathered quickly. Down in a pit-like hollow, hanging from a moss-covered grapevine, was the man for whom they were searching. Evidently, he had tripped and fallen into the ravine where a vine had encircled his neck and broken it. Thus ended the life of a murderer. After this, the local residents stated that each time they passed the hollow, they could hear a moaning noise. They said it was the voice of the moonshiner crying in pain.